Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today in episode 133, I'm very happy to introduce you to my first-time guest, Ryan Patrick Burns. He's the creator of the popular podcast called Hero Paranormal. Ryan Patrick Burns began researching the Unitah Basin and the mysterious SKINWALKER Ranch years ago. But when his passion for answers could no longer be quenched, he left his corporate job in Salt Lake City and moved to the desolate and remote basin to investigate the ranch full time. Ryan now owns property overlooking the ranch, and as I mentioned earlier, he hosts the popular podcast Hero Paranormal, and he's also written about his experiences investigating the SKINWALKER Ranch. Ryan, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Karen. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. You came highly recommended by our mutual friend, Chris Matthew from Forbidden Knowledge News. So it's kind of nice that all of us podcasters are kind of connecting and finding out the research each other's doing. And I'm really fascinated to learn more about the SKINWALKER Ranch. But before we talk about that, maybe you could tell us about how you got started in being interested in the SKINWALKER Ranch and how you came to all of this high strangeness.
Yes. Back in the late 90s, I had an experience with what can only be called a skinwalker. And ever since then, I've basically been unable to shake the need to delve deeper down the rabbit hole. And it's one of those enigmas that the deeper you go, the more you realize, the less you know. And it started out pretty scary, and back then nobody knew about this area. The locals knew, but it was not on TV. It wasn't broadcast in newspapers, none of the above. And it was the location of a couple of pretty serious black budget projects, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, and its sister project known as OSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. And these were black budget projects that we have now found out through Freedom of Information Act requests, et cetera. They've been somewhat declassified and are in the public realm of information. And we know that there was at least 22 million spent on that, but that is what we know. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. And what we don't know is probably more than what we know. But my experience was pretty wild, because I had an experience right there back then on a random ranch road. There were no gates or fences back then to speak of where I had my experience. And I was a fly fishing guide at the time. I was looking for fresh water to fish. I had some time off from work due to an injury. And this seemed like a likely place to find some lunkers. It was an area below a man-made reservoir known as Bottle Hollow Reservoir. As I said, a really, really beautiful red rock mesa. And as I was driving my truck down this random ranch road, I didn't know it from anywhere, I had what can only be described as an elderly Native American sighting up on the ridge. They were kind of robotically walking down this rocky outcropping, and it seemed very out of place and unnatural. And I rolled down my window when they got to the dirt road, and I said, "Hey, are you okay? Can I give you a ride somewhere?" There was no response, absolutely zero verbal communication. They just got in the vehicle. And I don't know if it was a male or a female. I do know that they appeared elderly, almost necrotic, and they were wearing a Native American blanket over them, so you couldn't really see them. I never got to get a full view of the face. I just saw that necrotic nose and lips kind of murmuring. And within seconds of getting in the vehicle, it seemed as if this entity was very much not human. And it seemed as if it was sort of archonically feeding off of my highs and lows throughout my life. It was just picking out the good stuff, the tasty stuff is how it felt. Kind of a mind rape. I don't know. It just seemed very archonic in nature, that it was, I felt like it was going through the Rolodex of my highs and lows in life. And I was in tears within seconds. Well, fast forward about 3 hours, I lost that much time. Bureau of Indian Affairs found me hanging out of my truck back on the other side of the mesa at the location known as Bottle Hollow Reservoir in the parking lot. And I was somewhat catatonic. They woke me up and asked me what happened. It sounded far-fetched, but I told them exactly what took place. And they didn't seem all that surprised. And between themselves, they said he definitely got nabbed by the Skinwalker. I had never heard that phrase before. And that was kind of the beginning of my path into this arena.
Wow, how creepy can it get? Oh my God. So maybe especially for the viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with what a skinwalker is, do you want to get a little bit into what that is? Now, my understanding is it's some kind of a paranormal entity that can manifest as different things like wolves and things like that. Do you want to tell us and tell me a little bit more about what exactly a skinwalker is, well, at least as far as you understand it?
Sure. And as near as Native American culture goes and lore, legend, it's important to get a little bit of backstory. In this particular area, this was an ability that many elders have purportedly had over the years and centuries. However, in this particular area, and this ability is basically to take an animal skin, much like the one I have on the wall back there, place it over oneself and become that animal for all intents and purposes, for not only safety in the case of past tribal battles and in the case of the cavalry, but also to escape certain situations. So it wasn't always a bad thing. But the backstory in this particular area, just over the border into Colorado, there's a valley known as the San Luis Valley, and there was an encampment of Navajo there, a very large encampment. They had found sort of an oasis, a place where they were off the beaten path. They weren't bothering anybody. They didn't have to worry about the cavalry and any skirmishes. They were a very peaceful people. And the Ute became aware of this location, and more or less to save themselves, which I completely understand. They had families and they were looking out for their best interest. They more or less threw them under the bus and sold out the location to the cavalry. Now, at the time, this was sort of the last straw. This was the last chance they had at a normal life. And the Navajo elders, medicine men and women, believed that this was unforgivable. The shaman said this was unforgivable, and they unleashed what they considered the most insidious entity in their toolbox, which was the Skinwalker. And they cursed this area, which is known as Fort Duchesne, more or less, a verdant valley south of Fort Duchesne, it's known as the path of the Skinwalker. They cursed this area with this entity known as the Skinwalker. And this was basically opening Pandora's box for all time and eternity, and the harshest consequence that they could magically think of to get some resolution out of this. So that's the backstory. Interestingly enough, this area, ever since then, it's always had a history, about 15 generations of high strangeness in this area. But after this curse, things really, really exponentially got out of hand. And we can get into that.
Oh, wow. That's really, really interesting. So I'm picking up from what you're telling us too, that there's an element of interdimensionality going on here, that perhaps the native people or opened some kind of a portal or dimensional opening to this being. The fact that in your experience, it sort of sucked your energy and your life force from you, as well as your memories. This is something that's, pretty terrifying, the stuff that nightmares are made from. So I can certainly understand why you started your quest to go down this road and find out more. You mentioned earlier those black projects. Do you think that those projects are trying to discover and perhaps even harness that negative energy? Or do you think that they're somehow enhancing it or amplifying it, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on the tie-in between those two things?
Those are really good points, Karen. And it's a really good question because I believe all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is not necessarily due to the making of these experimental projects, these black budget programs. What they found in the area, and the area, to give a little backstory, a rancher and his wife and others, many in the area, have seen a smorgasbord of paranormal activity, everything from cryptozoological creatures to UFOs to portals opening up in the sky. You name it, it's there. It's sort of a paranormal Disneyland. So it seems as if this area already geologically is sort of worn thin, and the veil is a little thinner there. So it's easier to interact with the paranormal or high strangeness in general. However, when the government came in through their Pentagon projects and started experimenting, for lack of a better word, with exotic toys, is what they called them, they experienced something they called bidirectional mimicry, which means it didn't matter what they brought to the table. This consciousness, this pre-cognitive sentient intelligence, as they termed it, basically could interact with them, and it was always 10 to 12 steps ahead in the chessboard. It ironically knew what they were going to do before they did it in most cases, and it was very precognitive. So it would utilize whatever it was they were experimenting and exponentially manifest that in a way that would suit its needs, meaning the high strangeness, the intelligence in the area, not theirs. So there's a lot of examples of that, but I really like the way that they coined that term, because what they realized is they had the very best of everything, all the best scientists, all the best gear. And what they realized is it could not hold a candle to the flamethrower of high strangeness. And it was always on its terms, meaning the precognitive sentient intelligence. So if you had a fear of whatever, a fear of spiders, it's likely that you would encounter something that could be used against you that would appear as a spider. And we hear about this often with the trickster scenario and mentality. But yeah, it's really interesting. I had no idea, obviously, that these black budget programs were taking place. I was younger and dumber back then, and I was literally, in these lands every night. Every second that I had free, I was there. And now that I look back, it's difficult for me to maintain or, consider what was government experiments and what was actual high strangeness, because both were going on.
Now, you were going to say something, I think, before I asked you the question, and I want to give you a chance to say it. Was there something else you wanted to delve into before we continue?
The only thing is that the Murphy's Law of it all, after Pandora's box was opened by these practitioners of magic, and the curse was placed on the Ute tribe, everything just kind of started to fall into place. The curse seemed to immediately take hold and have a lot of traction. So, for example, the first band of Buffalo Soldiers was in the area and were literally in control of Fort Duchesne, and they were mostly Prince Hall Masons. They were aware of the Masonic magic. They were also aware, they were from the West Indies, so they also had voodoo backgrounds. And there was almost immediately spell work going back and forth from the Native Americans to the Buffalo Soldiers and back to the Native Americans. Fast forward, this reservoir that was created on the other side of a very porous sandstone mesa. And this mesa was never intended to hold back water. So all of a sudden you have this sandstone that's just permeated with water, and water is entering a bunch of hollow caverns, for lack of a better word, that are within the mesa and under the ground. So that threw everything off. And then the Utah Water Project, the Central Water Project in Utah, came through in the 50s and put the largest power lines you could ever imagine directly over this mesa, and charging everything below it. And those have since slowly deteriorated the casings to where if you go under those with an electromagnetic frequency detector at all, it goes off the chain. So you have all kinds of things that have contributed to the high strangeness. And many locals have seen craft come up close to the power lines. It seems like almost feeding off the energy. They've seen it go into the reservoir, which there used to not be water there, and other things that are even more strange. And I've gathered footage of from locals, which is large sea serpents in the reservoir, things that should not be there. Plesiosaurs shouldn't be there. Obviously, it's a man-made body of water, but a lot of strange drownings. People have seen these creatures, and the list goes on and on. I don't want to go off topic, but yeah, ever since the curse, things just got worse.
Wow, it sounds like a perfect storm. You take the curse itself, and then you take the secret operations doing experiments. And I don't know what it is about humans. We just think we can dabble and technologically interfere with things and think that everything's going to be okay. And then you add the water, and water is a carrier of energy and even intelligence. And then you add the electricity to it. And oh my God, what a perfect storm for a lot of high strangeness. And I have to ask you this. How, for me, I'd be terrified to be in the area. And you moved to the area, and I understand that you're actually overlooking the Skinwalker Ranch. And, is that not a scary thing for you to be there? Or are you just embracing it and going, I want to find out all I can, and you're just sort of driven to do that?
That's a really good question, Karen. It has at times seemed like a nightmare, and I've wondered what I'm doing. But what I've found is that kind of walking through that darkness and engaging with some of that fear is how I have connected more, I think, with the light. Mm-hmm. And, it's such a fundamental basis that unless you get enveloped with it and literally taken over and lose yourself to the darkness, you need to have that light in your life to get you through it. And if anything, it's a reminder and a constant reminder of how important it is to manifest that light in our lives and have that spiritual foundation.
Oh, I agree 100%. I have my own paranormal experiences and high strangeness in my own life. And it's actually helped me to ground myself more, into the reality of my choosing, not one that's sold to me, but also being in the light and all the things that go with that. It's actually helped a lot. So I've had a similar outcome from my experiences. Now that leads me to another question, and that is the overlap between ET. My experiences with ET, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I'm going to be on your show on Friday. So folks, tune in to Ryan's channel to hear more about that. But my whole experience has been very transdimensional. I say transdimensional because for some reason, I'm able to move in and out of different realities. And it sounds like what's going on in your area is very much an interdimensional, transdimensional reality. And so I have to ask you, do you think, I know you mentioned flying saucers, but do you think there's an ET component to this? And if so, how? Or how would that look?
Absolutely. And I really like this question. And I like the fact that you have the Aliens and Angels podcast up, because that is, one of those areas where semantics gets involved. And there are definitely a hierarchy of entities in the area. I've seen things that, I can't explain, and they would fall under those categories. So absolutely, there is many of the top level minds that I've had an opportunity to speak with believe that these are the semantics gets in the way. Unfortunately, every time you put a name on something, you limit what it can actually do. But in these scientific terms, in scientist talk, they believe that there is an alien artificial intelligence present at the location. There are more ancient intelligences at the location. And there is this somewhat quasi, not omnipotent, but I'll just say a god with a small g present. In other words, this precognitive sentient intelligence, which it's not omnipotent. You can fool it, but it doesn't like it. And for all intents and purposes, it is able to know what you're thinking before you think it, unless you interact in a game of sorts and rely on quantum number generation or random number generation to make your decisions, in which case you can stifle it. And it gets more interested, but you can tell it gets a little agitated. So there's some interesting, an interesting hierarchy, I believe, of entities. It's not just one.
Mm-hmm. Now, not to make fun of the situation, but it seems to me it's almost like the portal got opened and then all these other dimensional realities have beings of some sort. And it's kind of like, hey, there's an opening. Let's go check it out and see what we can do there. And I'm not trying to make fun in any way or make light of it, but it just seems like it's like an invitation to all the different sources of beings that are possible. And I think partly because of our programming, I think we've been dummied down to see things in basically, I believe we live in a three-dimensional construct that's very, very limiting. And I think that just our human nature and our limited, well, at least most people believe in our, original five senses, just are so limited. We can only see such a narrow band of the different light frequencies. We can only hear such a narrow band of sound frequencies, and on it goes. So I think there's a whole lot going on all the time that we may not be aware of, and we're just going about our daily lives. But I think in this area, there's so much crossover that it's undeniable. I'm wondering if you want to get into a little bit the history of the Skinwalker Ranch, because some people may not be familiar with that story, and I think that's an important component to what we're talking about today.
Sure. And it all started in the same basic time frame, the late 90s, when I had my experience. Terry Sherman and Gwen Sherman, his wife, purchased a property in this zone of high strangeness. It's not by any means the only place where this happens. The whole area is very active with high strangeness, and this entity doesn't seem to care about boundaries or fence lines, but they encountered almost immediately interaction with something they couldn't understand. They had a very large canine approach them the first day on the property, and they interacted with UFOs. They saw very tall entities, which apparently were wearing, similar to like when we were kids, those moon boots, and standing next to very strange looking chupa-like craft, which were shiny and RV looking. And these would come onto the property from time to time. And he kept thinking that, hey, wait, there's an RV that's come on the property again. Yet they would float off when he went to approach them. All kinds of strange goings on, and cattle mutilations that were horrific. The stuff really hit the fan when a reporter, Zach Van Eyck, did a cover story in a Salt Lake City, Utah newspaper. And he basically went out and reported what was taking place, according to this rancher. This got national attention, and the real estate tycoon from Las Vegas, Robert Bigelow, who was already very entrenched in the study of high strangeness, UFOs, and the like, and funding a lot of research, got wind of this. He purchased the property, kept Terry on as a consultant, and he almost immediately began researching and investigating it with his researchers, which at the time were called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. And then secretly with a couple of these black budget projects, but and then later with something called BASS, Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Space Studies. And these all basically more or less came to the same conclusion that it doesn't matter how high of level of scientific expertise you have, this trickster entity, these precognitive sentient intelligences were able to always one up the best of the best in every scenario. So that's a little bit of background. Interestingly, Terry Sherman had some really interesting experiences with how he engaged with the phenomenon, and I appreciate the simplicity of it. He would sort of hunt it as if it was an animal, and he had just a video recorder. He wouldn't use any lights. He'd crawl on his belly, for hours on end to approach this and get close enough to get footage. And to be 100% honest, he may have gotten the best footage and the best data of anyone. And it's sometimes simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so interesting. Now, with you having a property that overlooks the ranch, have you been able to actually see anything for yourself going on that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I've done a lot of technology survey studies, a lot of research, a lot of experiments myself. I've also offered it to others who are researchers and scientifically inclined and a lot smarter than I am. And there have been a lot of things seen, and there's a lot of possibilities that the area has, and both good and bad. I've had people who have arrived on site who had health conditions. Those conditions dissipated. Even recently, a gentleman had a knee problem. He was out there and he took his brace off. He didn't need the brace anymore. By the same token, there is a lot of information that has been coming out of the CIA. A particular doctor, Dr. Kit Green, has had a bunch of slides and data leaked from his desk having to do with something he calls interference syndrome, which is a very real medical condition or syndrome, which is in and around this area. People who have experienced high strangeness, UFOs, these advanced propulsion systems, etc., have encountered, for lack of a better word, dead spots on their brain. There's just portions of their brain which appear dead or gone, literally like Swiss cheese. What's interesting is these are very high-level, intelligent, high IQ individuals who continue to perform their duties in advanced positions. So it doesn't seem as if they are really getting downgraded in intelligence. In fact, in some cases, they almost seem to be receiving downloads and becoming more apt at ingenious activity. But what's strange about it is it's a very real health concern and health situation. There has been a contagion of sorts, which has been suggested, and they call it interference syndrome. Now, where it gets really odd is that they have a number of patients and a huge data set. They're getting codes for insurance companies to be able to provide care for these individuals. And it's very similar to like Havana syndrome that the CIA was investigating a while back. So within the agency, there's some concern, and we don't know what the long-term health effects are of it. So whether this has to do with the high strangeness or not, I'm not a doctor, but the data suggests that all the stuff coming off of his desk that's been leaked suggests that it is contagious. So even if, for example, someone went to the area and experienced this high strangeness and somehow contacted this syndrome, they could travel thousands of miles, go back home, and literally spread it to family members and friends, where the family members and friends would encounter high strangeness, witness paranormal activity, and may even possibly get some of the health effects.
The body thrives when it has a mission, and there is no greater mission than to become the change we wish to see in the world. Sometimes, though, we need a little help from consultation and support services. Have you discovered that this world is not what you thought it was? Have recent global events awakened you and leave you feeling unsettled? Do you feel isolated with your not-so-popular newfound beliefs? Would you like to learn to thrive in this new state of awareness? It is a big shock to wake up and find that the old familiar world is gone, and it can be disturbing to go down the various rabbit holes only to find that the information is difficult to digest, and few people are willing to talk openly about it. You are not a conspiracy theorist. You are awakening, and once you find your way through it, there are many blessings on the other side. My name is Karen Holton, and I offer vital services that may be just what you need, and support for your journey into the weird and wonderful. Check out my Awakening Support and Ascension consultation, created to support individuals with their chosen alternative realities and lifestyles, health and recovery, and spiritual adventures. For more details, check out the various vital services found on my website, and be assured that I have found personal success with every category featured. My website is www.KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. That's KarenHolton healthcoach.com. Wow, it's really interesting. So that sort of points towards the idea that we sort of share some common consciousness, and that things can actually, I don't know, transmigrate along those, I don't know, energy pathways or whatever common consciousness is. There's so much we really, really don't know. What's interesting about what you said is next week on the show, Chris Matthews coming on, and we're going to talk a bit about his experiences that indicate that we're living in some kind of a technological creation. And I myself I definitely have different states of consciousness, and I have different dream states. So I have the usual dream state that probably everybody shares. And then I have dream states where I'm definitely in a different dimensional reality, and they're very intense, those experiences. But I have a third dream state where I'm being influenced by some kind of technology. And so we're going to talk about it next week. But it's very interesting because I've had so many paranormal experiences, and then people that I get close to who maybe have never had paranormal experiences, they start having them as well. And so it's all just, to me, it's very fascinating. I don't find it frightening, because I think that this is stuff that we should know about, or we will eventually understand, and it'll be a part of our reality, and we'll learn how to deal with it. But getting back to the whole Skinwalker Ranch, what direction are you headed for your research? And as far as, and there's other research being done on the Skinwalker Ranch. Can you tell us what direction you think that might be going in? What's the next steps as well?
100%. It's all sorts of different directions, the survey studies that we've been embarking on. Interestingly enough, that is, I'm not reinventing the wheel. This is something that's been done in the past. For example, when Bigelow was owning the property, he had custom Ouija boards made, and he had security guards utilizing very esoteric and occult means to activate these things as well. But we've gone slightly different direction, and there's a lot of things that can be gained from this. I think consciousness studies are probably the most impending, in my opinion, but there's also aerospace applications, applications for ultra capacitors as energy and power storage devices for different applications. There's something very similar to, I guess, quantum computing that we're looking at and utilizing some of those technologies. And there's other very strange detections that we're getting, tracking some of these UAP vehicles at hypersonic velocities. I mean, some of these things are so high up in the atmosphere and moving so quickly that you can't even imagine how quickly these things will move and how high they appear to be. But back to your question, going in all directions. But I think that what you said before you asked that question is very much on the right track, that there is a consciousness aspect to all of this. And there seems to be a universal consciousness which can be tapped, and that locations such as this and others make it more readily available, easier to tap. And whether that's utilized via more traditional biological means like breath work, heavy meditation, or whether you're utilizing some of the more modern technologies like the God helmet, the Anja lamp, the Pandora star, it doesn't really matter the direction, but as long as you're going down that general highway, there seems to be a path of enlightenment that has to do with consciousness. And that's actually what Bigelow and the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, which is what he's involved with now, are focusing on. So there's a lot of after death stuff that could be relevant as well, but it's a bigger picture. And the more you dive down the rabbit hole, the bigger the picture gets. The more you realize, like, wow, we just have a little piece of this. Maybe we should be looking at that, and maybe we should be looking at anti-gravity, and maybe we should be looking at fusion, or negative energy states in a vacuum, and all these different things that inherently, I think at the end of the day, they all can fall under the same high strangeness or the same enigma, but consciousness seems to wrap it up really well.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I also think that there's like a larger connection between what we see as isolated events, like, for instance, Bigfoot, ETs, ghosts, paranormal stuff. I was going to say, in my case, like I think that we're all capable of inter and trans-dimensional contact. Because I myself am nobody special. I don't have any special gifts. I'm not the smartest, or I shouldn't say I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but one thing that I try to tell people, and I don't know if they believe me or not, is that I had a significant amount of trauma, extreme trauma in my life as a child. And what that did was allowed me to dissociate and go to a place where I just let go of all control, because I just felt I had no control whatsoever. And I started lucid dreaming and having different experiences. And I think those things have also led to my gifts, what I call my gifts today. And of course, I had to get my shit together. I had to, well, I know this isn't a very nice word, but I had to unfuck myself, because I was really screwed up, and I had to sort that out and get to a place of peace. And so I think that trauma, when we deal with it and we face it, I think, and can come to that place of peace, where now the trauma has, and I'm not saying trauma is good. I don't think anyone should have to go through trauma. It's not a good route. I don't recommend it. But I'm just saying that if it has happened, we can spend our whole lives in torment over what happened to us, or we can work through that, find that place of peace, and find out that because of the changes in our physiology, in our spiritual selves, in our emotional selves, we're now more open to and able to have some of these amazing experiences. And so I think that everything is going on all the time. I think some areas, of course, have more high strangeness than others. Like you said, the veil is thinner in some areas. I think even different times on the calendar, there's more high strangeness possibility. But I also think that, for those of us who are brave enough, and it truly does take courage to cross over and experience some of these things. Wow, it's an amazing, amazing life. Like, I would not change my life for anything because of the experiences and the things that I've done. And but anyway, enough about me. I'm sorry, I did not mean to ramble on too much. I'm wondering if you want to talk about your writings. Now, did you publish a book, or have you done some magazine articles, or tell us about the writing that you've done based on what you've discovered?
Sure. I am by no means a magnificent author, but I have, I have a few books that I've written. Not all are out in published work, but the two that are the most popular are, there's one called the Utah UFO Ranch, and the other one is Shapeshifter Territory. And you can access those at heroparanormal.com, or you can go to ryanpatrickburns.com. You can also go to Lulu Publishing, and I think you can just go to Amazon. So you can access those in a bunch of places. And they're just kind of, there seemed to be so much going on that, if quite a few people said you better write some of this stuff down because you may forget some of it. And sure enough, I'll sometimes pick up one of the books and I'll go through and I'll say, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
But kind of getting back to what you were saying, I think that even though some areas are more prone to high strangeness and the awareness, right, that there's more than us going on, I think that once you realize that, as you've said, it's with you. And if you're alive and kicking, and this goes for everybody, if you're alive and kicking, you are a live wire. You have so much energy and power that you're not even aware of. It's amazing. You're a miracle. And you find this, the more you delve into this stuff, and even when it gets dark, because I think, as I said, walking through the darkness, you appreciate the light more. And I think that most people are inherently good, whether they want to be or not. And sometimes, they try to get away from it because a lot of times self-will comes into play. And anyway, it could go on and on. But if you're alive and kicking, I think that you are able to do a lot of the things that you were discussing, able to manifest positive things in your life, able to do some of the more fascinating things like out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, just tinker with that stuff online if you want to just have a good time, because you'll find that it's like anything, practice makes perfect. And I've encountered all kinds of people who have, started investigating or researching stuff just because they're interested in, like, wow, can that actually exist? And then an array of potentiality opens up in them that they didn't know they had. They'll start businesses, or they'll start doing something that is very passionate to them, and they weren't doing that before. But just that paranormal tap on the shoulder, letting them know that the world is a much more interesting place than the mainstream media will have you believe.
Oh, I agree. I see it very much as being a fractal experience. So all we have to do is get an urge to go in a specific direction, and it will unfold and unfold and unfold. And one thing leads to another and another. It's just exponentially exciting. And, I don't care what people think of me. That's one of the beauties of getting to be an old woman, is I don't have to care what people think of me. And I'm also not engaged in a lot of the things that keep people's minds busy. I'm not, worrying about other people, places, or things. I can focus on what I want, how I want my fractal flow to unfold in what direction. It's very, very exciting. I got to tell you something that happened to me recently is I started having these super vivid interdimensional experiences that happen to me while I'm sleeping. And one thing I've always wanted to do is to become awake and fully conscious during one of these dream sessions. So I've been working towards that. So there's an example of how the fractal flow works. That's something I had a desire for. I put it out there. I wanted to do. And so I had one of these super vivid dreams, and I became conscious during it. I went, oh my God, look at what I'm experiencing. Am I dead? What's happened to me, right? And then I went, oh, I don't care. I'm just going to enjoy this wonderful experience. And then just a couple nights ago, I actually woke up during the dream state. I was in the dream state, and it was so real that I couldn't tell that it wasn't real. I thought I was awake and it was actually happening. And I went, oh my God, I'm fully conscious. I'm fully conscious. What am I going to do? Do I want to fly or do I want to manifest something? And I couldn't decide what I wanted because I was so excited about being fully conscious in the dream state. And then I got so excited, I woke myself up and I went, oh, shit, we'll have to try that again. But I mean, this is unbelievable. Like when I tell people what I've been through, I actually am also working on a book. And I have it about 70% finished. So I'm pretty excited that I'm actually getting closer to publication. And, I don't expect people to believe me because it's unbelievable. But we experience these things for real. And nobody can take that away from me. And nobody can gaslight me and tell me I'm crazy or I'm imagining things or whatever. No, I'm hanging on to it. This is mine. I feel like I earned it and I deserve it and I want more of it. And I'm finding it very, very exciting. I have been fortunate that my scary experiences have always come from the hands of human beings, not from the other side, not from interdimensional beings. So I really encourage people to pursue that. Now we've got a few minutes left, Ryan. I wanted you to finish anything you want to tell us about the whole Skinwalker ranch or phenomenon, and then I want you to shift into your podcast and tell us, what motivated you to start it? When do you air? It's probably, I don't know if you publish it on your YouTube channel. I'm guessing that you do. Yeah, tell everybody about all of that as well.
Sure. And gosh, let's see, where do I start? I think that as far as the podcast, it is just something that I started to report on things that I thought were interesting. It started very humbly. It still is a smaller podcast. You can access it via YouTube. You can go to heroparanormal.com, and it's also on Patreon. And it's slowly grown to involve other things and incorporate more of an interview process. So I interview people. I also just chat. It's a lot like a lot of podcasts. But yeah, I would love for people to check it out. And as far as the skinwalkers, something I think I did not completely answer is how they go about doing what they're doing.
Oh, wonderful.
And yeah, that is a very interesting field. If you could study just that field, and I have for quite some time, and it really does kind of come down to magical perspectives. And what has been found in my research is that a lot of the rituals are similar to left-hand path or dark adept rituals in other cultures, which is fascinating to me because if you go, for example, to the Middle East and you have someone conjuring the jinn, they have a very similar ritual as to some of this darker Native American magic known as the witchery way. And the jinn is also purportedly a shapeshifter of sorts. And so there's a lot of correlation, no matter where you are on the planet, that these rituals are very similar. And you have to ask yourself, many of these are thousands of years old. They didn't have the internet back then. how are they all doing pretty much the same thing? And I think it gets back to that universal consciousness that we were discussing.
Mhm.
And the same is true of light work. So I think that, that's very important. I'm also fascinated with the fact that animals are incorporated, and a lot of shapeshifter magic is incorporated all over the planet in different magical practices. So it's by no means unique, but it definitely has its own skill set involved. And I think it's interesting that if you delve into other dark magicians such as Aleister Crowley, you find that, not only was he doing very interesting workings, but he was quite literally trying to, be bad and get rid of his guardian angel, which he found was nearly impossible to do, which brings us back to the reality that we have, that fundamental foundation and spiritual guidance when we need it and if we rely on it. So I think that's really interesting. And I know that your show goes into quantum guides, and I think that that's very important for people to realize that, here we have a guy who, Aleister Crowley, even though many people, he's not very popular, I think that he quite literally sort of proved many positive things. And that was among one of them, that, he was trying to do all this insidious, horrible behavior to shake his guardian angel, who still was there to help him. And he showed, even when you do everything wrong, there's still some good there. So quite literally, proving the same things as many of the more enlightened masters, but just from a different angle of perspective. So yeah, rely on that, that goodness that you have, because a lot of people that have gone down that left-hand path, that dark path, reinforce their positivity when they come back and realize they were basically playing for the wrong team. But yeah, it's very interesting that there is so much universality involved with magic. You have the moon and the sun and the stars and the cosmos and the aliens and the angels and all these different entities in a hierarchy of intelligences, which congruently they work together like a symphony. They all have kind of a yin and yang aspect to them, right? Positive and negative charges.
Yeah.
And how you get through life is basically up to you. So live the best life you can, as you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I actually endeavor to follow the middle path, not to try to be too good and not try to be too bad, to just kind of follow that middle path, because that's what I find is the most peaceful. Another interesting thing I was thinking of while you were speaking is I recently put a post on Facebook asking if there's anybody else out there who experiences transdimensional stuff. And, a lot of people went, well, what do you mean by that? And what I mean by that is, it can be anything that we would class as paranormal. And a lot of people came back and said, oh, there's no such thing. And they all poo-pooed it. But you know what? One thing that's universal is prayer. And it doesn't matter what you imagine, your higher self or universal consciousness or God or Allah, or it doesn't matter what you pray to. We pray all the time. Isn't that interdimensional contact? And then when our prayers are answered, is that not interdimensional contact? So we're having it all the time, whether we believe in it or not. And getting back to the angel thing, that's so significant what you said, because I had my angelic experience before I had any of my ET experiences. And what I learned from that, it was just a one-time thing. Although I do have some contact, but nothing like the first time. That's when I learned that there's nothing we can do to make them leave us or turn away from us. They have such a high level of understanding that they're so compassionate to our plight and our situation. They may realize reasons why we do what we do when we don't even realize why we're doing what we do. And then the caveat that went with that for me was be careful what you ask for, because you might just get it. So that's the other thing. So like there's high strangeness at every level of reality. And I think the biggest thing is overcoming fear and embracing the fact that we are, I believe, truly interdimensional and capable of transdimensional travel, communication. It's also interesting. I listened to a podcast. Unfortunately, it was taped and sent to me, or recorded, I should say. They don't tape anymore, and sent to me. And it was about how somebody, I can't remember which scientific study, but they found out that each of the 7 chakras, we actually have more than 7, but the 7 basic chakras all communicate at a different speed. And so they are like the root chakra is the slowest and the crown chakra is the fastest. But even the root chakra is the speed of light to the power of 8. So that's the speed of light times the speed of light times the speed of light. So no wonder interdimensional communication is so fast. And then, it goes up from there. So the possibilities are absolutely endless. We can pretty much have what we want. The big thing, I think, is turning off the TV and the fear porn. And, and even myself, I want to find out what's going on, in the news. I don't watch TV, but I do watch YouTube videos, and occasionally I'll get caught up in it. And then I have to remind myself there's a whole reality so much bigger than that. It's almost like there's a completely separate reality that we can step into, where life is good and things are beautiful and there's love and there's connection. Doesn't matter whether it's with plants, with our furry pets, with the stars we see at night. It's just so amazing. And so I'm really excited to have you on the show today, that we can talk about some of this high strangeness, but not in a fear-inspiring way, in a very matter of fact, and this is our experiences, and how walking in the light is I think the best path. It sure helps you to sleep better at night, and it's rewarded me with all kinds of miracles. Yeah, we can talk about more about that on Friday when I'm on your show, but yeah, it's an amazing reality. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners and the viewers, Ryan, before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I really like what you said. And when I feel that when I interact with some of these entities that are able to do these amazing things in these strange places, that it is very much like astonishing to witness these I think they're just being playful any way they can, right? Connecting, interacting any way they can. And some of those ways may be construed as malevolent, when in reality they're not. And it might scare us, when in reality it's not meant to be scary. And it oftentimes reminds me of there's tons of examples of this, when people encounter both aliens and angels, where they're horrified of something, and it's really just the engagement with the other, with something different than yourself. But if you see it for what it is, it's not as scary, to just avoid the fear. And I just want to reiterate what you already said, that yeah, your mind is such fertile ground. Just picture the most fertile farmland you can see, and be very careful, like what you scroll on your phone, what you look at on TV, because you're throwing seeds onto that land that you may not want them to grow. So you have to be aware of that. I have a couple of toddlers, and I'm becoming very aware that it's not that they can't handle certain things, but as you said, what you put in the ground is going to grow. And there's just no need for some of it. So yeah, be careful what you wish for. I love that.
And be master or mistress of your own domain. That's pretty cool too. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I've really appreciated our conversation. I hope you'll come back one day and we can discuss things further. And I want to say thank you to all the viewers and the listeners. I appreciate you so very much. Without you, I wouldn't even have a show. And I just hope that you have the best week ever. So until next week, I'm going to say bye-bye, and we'll see you next week on the Quantum Guide Show. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for joining me for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change that you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to my YouTube and other channels at Karen Holton TV. Click the like button, leave me a comment, and share this podcast with your friends. Check out my website at www.KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com to see my free resources and amazing products and services. All the links will be in the description below. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, you will find the Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton and also the Aliens and Angels podcast on all audio platforms. Until next time, keep up the good work.